Alrighty there, and we are back. 2020 College Football Podcast, episode number 6. I just want to give a couple disclaimers as well as a quick announcement, or really just a notification for that matter, which I know are the same things, but for you guys get what I'm saying here. I just want to let y'all know, before we really dive into this is probably going to be a little bit of a shorter episode than what my normal videos are. I had a headache this afternoon. It's been on and off as we have gone into the evening, and it does not kill me right now as I'm recording this, but I don't know if it's going to hit me again while I'm recording this. And what ends up happening when I have these headaches is it's less of the pain that ensues in my nervous system in the cranium, but rather just this fog that comes over me that really doesn't allow me to think. And I might not sound like I can think right now. I'm not 100% sure. But I just really can't think. And during these podcast episodes, I like to give y'all some, not necessarily in-depth analysis, but I like to pick out a couple specific things from what I saw from the games and stuff like that to help broaden or help basically amplify the knowledge or really just make my podcast better. I think that makes it better. And I'm not exactly sure I'll be able to do that just because that brain fog is going to come eventually through the headaches. And so I will try to do my best with this podcast, but I just want to let y'all give y'all basically a disclaimer before we started about this podcast. But another thing I wanted to let y'all know, thank y'all very much for the support that y'all have been giving me for these podcasts. This is the first season in all the college football seasons that I've made a weekly podcast. Like every single week I made a podcast. Sometimes I've done them every once in a while, but I've never followed up on it week by week. And as I said earlier, this is the first time I've really done that consistently. And that is totally due to y'all and y'all's support and having a substantial amount of people, not a huge amount, but a substantial amount of people I can rely on to watch the podcast and give me relative feedback, and I really appreciate that. So I know these podcasts might not be amazing. I know it's just a black screen. I know it's really low tech. There's not a high budget that goes into these. These things are pretty. I mean, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel here. It's more about just me talking and almost having like a conversation with you guys, in that regard. And so I really appreciate the support I've been able to get on these podcasts, and I really appreciate y'all watching them. And if we can keep going here, let's keep going, and let's have a good rest of the season. Who knows what the season holds ahead of us? Who knows, really? And with the world we live in right now, who knows what the next 2 weeks holds? But, let's have a good rest of this season. Let's keep making these podcasts. And if y'all want some more as we come next year and the year after that, I will keep making them because I really do enjoy doing this. And I've always had a lot of nuggets of information that I wanted to bring up in conversation with people, but I haven't necessarily been able to do that with specific people. And I guess this is an avenue for me to express my thoughts, analysis, conclusions, and obviously prognosis with projections in the upcoming weeks, and how I think the certain performances are going to translate later down the road. And we'll make sure to talk about a couple ones of those today. So just really thank y'all for the support. And with that, let's get into this podcast. So on tap for today, we're going to talk about the ACC. We're going to talk about a couple games within the ACC. We're going to talk about Clemson, Georgia Tech, with that massive win by Clemson, putting up 73 points. We're going to talk about the UNC-FSU game, and we're going to talk about how there should be no excuses for that loss at all for UNC. I don't care. There may have been a couple questionable calls, or obviously with some drop passes. It does not matter. You lose to Florida State, there is no excuses, but we'll get into that a little bit more in depth. And then obviously we're going to talk about Louisville and Notre Dame. Just potentially some writing on the wall there. And let me promise you this. Judgment Day is coming for Notre Dame here very, very soon, which is quite ironic. They're a Catholic school, but that's neither here nor there. And then we're going to dive in a little bit farther south and go to the SEC, and we're going to talk about UGA versus Alabama. That was the main game in the SEC. Let's be real here. These are the top two teams in the SEC by far, and I really don't think there's a close third. Maybe there is. Maybe Florida. I guess you could put Florida up there. But even with Florida, and riddle me this right now. Just all y'all listening at home. You really think Florida stays within 2 touchdowns of Alabama? Do you really think Florida stays within 2 touchdowns of Alabama? I don't know. I really don't know if I can trust that. They probably beat Georgia. Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think the game with Georgia would go down to a close game, and I think that Georgia would probably win, just because Georgia's had a history of beating Florida. Even when I thought Florida may have had a little bit of better of a team, or certainly more momentum going into the game. But do you really think Florida beats Alabama or really keeps it close down to the very end? I certainly don't. I think Georgia plays a better role. So we're going to talk about the UGA and Alabama. And then our last point we'll hear will be about the Big Ten starting in the upcoming week, which is awesome. We're going to get to see overrated Michigan get overhyped by the media the entire year and then get demolished by Ohio State in the last game of the season. I mean, all these things are going to come back, and maybe 2020 is going to return back to normal, the things we want to see. But we will talk about that briefly at the very end of the podcast. So with that, let's dive into the first topic here. We're going to talk about the ACC, as I mentioned earlier. Clemson, Georgia Tech, some quick thoughts on that game as we move on here. Clemson played really, really well. There's no way to go around that. There's no way to sugarcoat it. There's no way to say that Georgia Tech isn't that good of a team, even though they're not that good of a team. Clemson showed up. Clemson was prepared, and Clemson is an elite team right now. Clemson and Alabama are, in my opinion, clearly the top two teams in college football. Of the teams that have played, I think Ohio State is more than deserving to be in that group as the top of the top. But the thing is, Ohio State hasn't played yet, and I'm not exactly sure how they're going to translate. They've had a lot of hype in the offseason. They haven't played yet. They've had a longer offseason, obviously, and so they may be a little bit more sluggish just because they've had to practice for so long. Obviously, the season being up in the air not too long ago, even being canceled for that matter not too long ago, could have thrown a wrench and stuff, or maybe it didn't. And the only way to figure that out is when we actually see them play. And so I'm not going to put them in there right now because I don't necessarily think. I think it's important to evaluate what you see on the field. We haven't seen anything Ohio State on the field yet. Do I think Ohio State is more than capable of getting to that top of the spot, or perhaps should already be there at the top of the top? 100%. Ohio State is unbelievable. We haven't seen them play. So when we see them play, we'll talk more about Ohio State in the coming weeks here. But Clemson is really in a class of their own right now. And there were a couple of maybe misplays by Clemson. Obviously, the Etienne fumble, the Lawrence pick, Ladson dropping a touchdown on the first play of the game for Clemson. Those are all things that are, maybe it was the first offensive play for Clemson. These are all things that are certainly not great, but when you have three, relatively major miscues, they all basically led in a negation of points. If Ladson catches the touchdown, if Ladson catches the ball, it's a touchdown. If Lawrence completes that pass, it's definitely a first down. It could lead to a touchdown. And Etienne obviously fumbling negated the drive. Or ended the drive essentially with the turnover. So, and even with all that, Clemson still scores 73, dominates Georgia Tech. Had one missed coverage on defense. It was in the first quarter and locked Georgia Tech down after that. Looked absolutely basic, and it truly goes to show you how good Clemson is, and the Clemson fans watching this, we got to enjoy this. This is not common. This is not what you should see. No, Clemson should not be beating Georgia Tech 73-7. That doesn't happen. We are truly living in the good old days right now, and the best is yet to come. Truly it is. And so, keep saying steadfast. Clemson's going to look good the next coming weeks. Should be great to see. Can't wait to watch Clemson-Syracuse this weekend. 45-point favorite. Open it up. I'll probably move a little bit in Syracuse's favor for that because that's a massive spread. A huge. You're basically projecting a 50-point win. That even for the teams that are the most explosive on offense, that's still a lot to put up. A lot of points for that matter, but we'll see. And with all that, UNC FSU now. I'm gonna be as blunt as possible for this. There is no excuse for losing to FSU. There is zero excuse for losing to FSU. There just isn't. Carolina losing to FSU is one of the not only one of the most humiliating upsets of all time, but perhaps one of the worst upsets of all time. If Carolina is truly a top 5 team, there is zero chance that Florida State should be competing with Carolina. None. No excuses. No drop pass. No, we should have won. None of that. None. You give up 31 to Florida State, which may be honestly more embarrassing than the loss itself. You give up 31 to Florida State. You get dominated for basically the entire game except for the fourth quarter. And, I mean, there's just no right way to remedy that. That's a bad loss with a capital B. That loss is up there with, like, if Clemson had lost to Georgia Tech on Saturday. That's how bad of a loss it is. Or maybe even Clemson losing to the Citadel. That's how bad of a loss. Florida State is that bad. This is the same team. This is the same Florida State team that lost by 42 to Miami. This could be a rough. I mean, I don't know if it's writing on the wall for the Tar Heels. I really don't, because Carolina is one of those teams that plays up to their competition and plays down to their competition. So Carolina may be able to recover from this, but man, that was a rough one on Saturday. And then moving into the last game in the ACC quickly here, Louisville and Notre Dame, 12-7 game. Really bad game for that matter. Louisville could have won that game. Was just a couple plays from really taking command of that game. But that's how every game is for that matter. So I'm not going to go down there the shoulda, woulda, coulda territory, what if, hypothetical possibilities. No, we're not going to talk about that. But Notre Dame, I mean, this is another bad team in Louisville. Notre Dame only winning 12-7 reminds me a lot of 2018 Notre Dame when they can only beat Vandy by like 7. The writing on the wall could be for Notre Dame right now. This could be a sign of things to come, the struggles on offense. And Judgment Day, when Clemson comes up to Notre Dame here in the first weekend of November, could be highly problematic for the Fighting Irish in that regard. It's just Clemson right now looks so good on offense and defense. If Notre Dame doesn't bring their absolute A game, it could be a very long night for the Irish. And I can promise you this: if Notre Dame scores 12 points against Clemson, they will lose by 30 points. I mean, there's just no way to sugarcoat. There's no way to jump around that. You gotta be able to put up more than 12 points in a game to have a sustainable team. And I don't want to. And I know when Joel Klatt goes on the podcast with Cowherd, and they're going to talk about how the complementary offense Notre Dame plays. And Notre Dame's not supposed to score that many points. And Notre Dame, I mean, this is an academic powerhouse. Forget it. No, it's not. Or actually, yes, Notre Dame is an academic powerhouse. But if you don't think Notre Dame football rules Notre Dame, you are out of your mind. Now, there's not the sharp contrast between football and academics like there is in Alabama. I mean, Notre Dame's a great academic institution, but you cannot sit around and say that Notre Dame's not a football school and football doesn't drive that school. You can't say that. They have a own television deal with NBC Network for Notre Dame's football specifically, and that's the only thing that keeps them from being a full member of the ACC. So you can't say the football's. You can't give all these excuses. Notre Dame has got to play better if they want to win it against elite competition. And that includes going against Carolina in December. Or maybe it's late November in Chapel Hill for that matter. This could be problematic for Notre Dame. I'm not exactly sure. But yesterday certainly did not give me a whole lot more confidence in the Fighting Irish. Now we're going to move into the SEC, UGA and Alabama. There's one main takeaway I'm gonna bring from this UGA Alabama game. I'm going to try to keep my analysis short on this game just because I know... I mean, everyone's watched that game by now. Everyone watched that game on Saturday night. Yes, UJ lost. Yes, they got outplayed in the second half. Yes, this puts them probably in second place for the rest of the SEC. Can they still be Florida? Absolutely. Yes, will they perhaps and probably most likely get a rematch with Alabama in the SEC championship game? Absolutely. Yesterday's loss for UGA was less about the loss and more about the realization that UGA may have played up to their highest potential coaching-wise with relatively good play calling and a pretty good scheme throughout. UGA may have hit their ceiling with Stetson Bennett too. And that ceiling, with all the things that went well for Georgia, is 17 points lower than Alabama. That is scary. Now, yes, I know there were some I know there were some interceptions, but this is the thing. That's Stetson Bennett. That's what you're going to get from a walk-on quarterback. This is not something overnight that Georgia can flip unless Kirby Smart can actually do something unprecedented and switch quarterbacks to the better quarterback for that matter. I mean, Kirby Smart has not been very able to handle the quarterback situation at Georgia well at all. Think about it, they had Justin Fields and went for Jake Fromm over that, and you saw how good Justin Fields is at Ohio State. They had Jacob Eason, who got hurt, and then they put in Fromm over him and never looked back. And now they have JT Daniels sitting on the sideline, who is a highly rated recruit and a transfer out of USC, and they refuse to play him. So, and not to mention DeJuan Mathis, who I believe was a 4-star, and he got four drives at the first part of the Arkansas game and was pulled. So, this is what you're getting out of Stetson Bennett. He's, 5'11", 5'10", not a huge arm, and he is not the dynamic quarterback that you need to beat a high-level team like Alabama. And that's just what it is. I'm worried that Georgia has hit their ceiling, and that ceiling is significantly lower than Alabama. And that is incredibly problematic for Georgia, not only now, but also moving forward, because as I said earlier, you're probably going to get Georgia-Alabama in a rematch in the SEC championship game. And the only reason why I say that is because I do think that Georgia is going to run right over Florida. I really do. And not maybe in terms of score, but I actually think they're going to run the ball right over Florida. Georgia's running attack is very, very good, and Florida's defense has been by far their Achilles heel, specifically up front. Not being able to get a ton of pass rush on the quarterback. You saw what Texas A&M was able to do. And I really do think that that's going to play into Georgia's favor. I think Georgia wins that game. I believe they're playing. My mind just went blank. They may not be playing, but I'm pretty sure they are playing. So that's enough for Georgia, Alabama. And as I said at the introduction, to wrap up this podcast here real quick, I'm going to talk about the Big Ten. Big Ten starting next week. It's going to be so nice. Ohio State, but just some quick projections, quick initial thoughts without looking too in-depth to at the schedules for that matter. Michigan's going to be overrated. They'll probably lose by 20 to 30 against Ohio State. Ohio State's going to be a very, very, very good team this week. This year. They're probably getting to the college football playoff at 8-0. I would not be surprised. Maybe it'll be 9-0, depending on how the schedule shapes out with the Big Ten championship or everything like that. But perhaps the most interesting thing. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this season for the Big Ten is they're playing 8 conference games, and then they have championship weekend. I believe it's that 19th. I want to say. We've already seen conferences have to cancel games. We've already seen conferences had to move games. We've already seen all that. The Big Ten doesn't have room for that. The Big Ten simply does not have the ability to cancel a game, or maybe 2, because oftentimes when you cancel one game or you lose a coach for one game, it leads for multiple games. And a 6-0 Ohio State with a 6-0 Michigan who haven't played each other yet, that could be problematic for just the Big Ten as a whole, because you're going to run into a situation where you really don't have enough game film to watch to really determine if this is one of the best teams in the nation without completely basing your assertions off of preseason judgments. And in a normal year, when the College Football Playoff Selection Committee comes around, we've already gotten a good idea of how good teams are. And it's in the preseason rankings and assertions and projections are out the window. You may not get that this year, especially if the Big Ten has to cancel. But that'll be an interesting thing to watch, especially if one of the big names cancels, such as a Michigan or an Ohio State, or especially a Penn State, who could have a very good year this year. Just something to keep in mind on. The Big Ten has no room for error, a very slim margin, and Ohio State is probably going to dominate this year. At least that's what I expect, because I've seen how good Ohio State can be, especially going into last year. All right. I'm sorry this one didn't have as much emphasis in it, or maybe enthusiasm, I should say, in this podcast, but I'm really, really, really tired. And I can feel this brain fog coming back. It doesn't actually hurt, but I can feel it coming on me, and I don't want to have to stay up too long with that, just because I want to make sure I get some good night's sleep tonight. I got a couple things to do for economics in the morning. Got to read that chapter for Kalina, midterm number 2. next Tuesday. If y'all are in Dr. Staub's class, y'all know what I'm talking about. Macroeconomics is going to be a lot of fun. Whew, that could be a rough one. I don't know, man. That one. Microeconomics wasn't too bad because, and in comparison to microeconomics is way easier, at least in this class. I don't know why it is. I feel like it is so much more easy. Perhaps the thing that makes macroeconomics macroeconomics so much more difficult is because there's so many components that go into macroeconomics. Like, I mean, you got the wage, labor, and how things shift, and long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply. You can have these shifts, but over time you're going to have natural adjustments that happen to bring the market back to long run. But y'all don't want to listen to that. That's not why y'all click on this podcast. But midterm number 2 is coming up next week. Should be very good. I'm going to try to make a podcast Sunday for y'all. I'm going to try my best to make a podcast for y'all. But no, I might not be able to because I'm going to be creating some study guides and some notes and some sheets and stuff like that we can have for this upcoming midterm, just making sure I know exactly what I need to have and making sure I can recognize graphs and how graphs move and all that type of stuff. So I'm going to try my best to get a podcast out. Should be able to get a podcast out, but I'm not going to give any official promises because I could be studying Sunday and Monday primarily for that midterm, obviously on Tuesday, as I said earlier. So I'll try to get it out. No promises. And we'll see what we can do. So again, thank y'all so much for watching this. Thank y'all for your continued support in this podcast series. I look forward to doing more of these in the future. Hope y'all have a good day, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week or the week after that for that matter.